Everyone ran from the furious bull, a terrifying and untamable beast, except the orphan with no shoes. What happens next will leave you speechless. The roar of splintering wood cracked through Greyford's bustling square. A heavy pen collapsed under the brute force of a massive bull, and before anyone could react, the animal burst free, its wild eyes blazing with fury. Stalls shattered as it tore through rows of baskets, scattering apples and pears across the dirt. Traders shouted in panic, the sound of their voices colliding with the crashing of carts as the beast slammed against them with its horns. Men dove for cover, ducking behind barrels, fences, and overturned wagons, each scrambling to protect themselves from the storm of muscle and rage that had been unleashed. The bull's hooves pounded like thunder against the earth, each strike echoing through the narrow streets. Dust rose in clouds around its massive frame, and its flaring nostrils sprayed hot bursts of air. A group of farmers tried to wave their arms to drive it away, but the beast swung its head violently, sending them scattering with cries of fear. It charged straight through a stall of pottery, shattering jars and spraying shards across the ground. Women screamed from doorways, dragging their children inside, and men cursed their luck, lamenting that such madness had struck during the annual fair, the day meant for celebration. In the midst of this chaos, one boy did not run. His bare feet pressed into the dirt, toes curling unconsciously as though anchoring him in place. His name was Lyle, though in Greyford he was known less by his name and more by his reputation. The orphan with no shoes, the boy who drifted about the town like an unwanted shadow. He stood alone now, a thin figure with ragged clothes, his hair uncombed and his cheeks smudged with dust. He clutched a small cloth bundle against his chest, as if it were the only shield he could afford. His wide eyes fixed not on the frightened crowd, nor the wreckage the bull left behind, but directly on the beast itself. The men hiding nearby noticed him. "The boy's mad!" one hissed from behind an upturned cart, his voice tight with disbelief. "He'll be trampled flat!" Another farmer peered out, shaking his head with fear. "Why isn't he moving? Get him out of there!" But none dared step into the open. The bull's rage had already proven it would destroy anything in its path. The beast spotted him too. It stopped for a heartbeat, snorting, its massive chest heaving with every breath. The square seemed to grow quiet except for the ragged sound of its breathing and the faint creak of wood from a broken stall swaying in the wind. The bull lowered its head, scraping its hoof against the dirt, the sound sharp like a blade being drawn. Dust rose in a cloud around it as it prepared to charge again. All eyes turned to Lyle, expecting him to break and flee, but the boy did not move. He trembled, his thin shoulders shaking, his lips pressed tight, but his feet remained planted where they were. Inside, Lyle's thoughts tumbled wildly. Fear clawed at his chest, begging him to run like the others, but something stronger anchored him. All his life, the men of Greyford had dismissed him as a nobody. He had grown used to their sneers, their laughter when they saw him scavenge for breadcrumbs, their careless remarks about how long he would last without a father to guide him. Every step he took barefoot through the town seemed to remind them of what he lacked. Yet as he stared at the bull's burning eyes, he felt something stir in him that was different. He did not see just a beast. He saw a storm of pain and rage that felt strangely familiar. He had lived his whole life beneath looks of disdain, beaten by words, denied kindness. Wasn't this bull, alone, furious, misunderstood, like him? The crowd could not hear his thoughts, but they watched as he took a small step forward, clutching his bundle tighter. His voice, though quiet, trembled into the heavy air. "I'm not afraid of you." His words were swallowed by the noise of the crowd, but the bull's ear twitched, as though it had heard. The boy's heart hammered so loud he thought it might burst from his chest, yet the thought would not leave his mind. If he ran now, he would prove them right. He would always be the coward, the stray. But if he stood, if he faced the storm head-on, perhaps he could discover something about himself that even he had never believed possible. The bull lunged suddenly, kicking up a wave of dust, and the ground shook beneath its pounding hooves. The crowd screamed as one, their voices rising above the thunder of its charge. But Lyle didn't move. His knees bent slightly, his grip on the bundle tightening until his knuckles whitened. The beast bore down on him, horns glinting in the sun, a living wall of muscle and rage. Still, the boy's eyes never shut. They locked onto the bull's, unflinching, desperate. He had nothing, no shoes, no weapon, no family. Only this moment, and the memory of a man he had never truly known. He thought of his father then. Though no one in Greyford spoke kindly of him, the bundle Lyle carried was proof enough for the boy that the man had once existed. He believed it contained the only piece of his father left in this world. It was all he had clung to during cold nights when hunger gnawed at him and loneliness hollowed his chest. Now, as the bull bore down, he held it like a sacred shield. He whispered to himself, so low that only he could hear, Don't let me fall. Not here. The bull was only strides away now, its nostrils flaring, its shadow swallowing him whole. The crowd gasped, some turning their faces away, unable to watch. But Lyle, trembling though he was, refused to turn. In that last heartbeat before impact, he saw not an enemy but a mirror. This beast was angry, yes, but it was not madness. It was wounded pride, broken trust. And in that understanding, Lyle found his courage. His lips curled into a faint, defiant line as he braced himself, thinking the words he had never admitted aloud. If he ran, he would prove the townsfolk right, that he was nothing more than a lost boy with no courage. If he stood, he might discover who he really was. The bull's muscles rippled as it surged toward him, the ground trembling under its massive weight. Its horns gleamed like sharpened blades in the sunlight, and each pounding step shook the square as though the earth itself recoiled from its rage. Lyle did not run. His chest rose and fell sharply, his heart hammering so loudly it drowned out the shouts around him. He closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in focus. He reached back into the quiet recesses of his mind, where memories of watching the farmers worked like sparks waiting to catch fire. He had stood in the shadows so many times, unseen and uninvited, while men guided cattle with quick reflexes and sharper instincts. Now those stolen lessons became his only weapon. At the last possible second, his body moved with instinct. He twisted his bare feet into the dirt and stepped aside, his frame light and quick, almost too small for the bull to adjust to. The beast thundered past him, missing by a breath, and its momentum carried it forward until it slammed into a wooden stall. Wood exploded into shards, scattering planks and cloth across the ground. The air filled with the crack of splintering boards and the startled gasps of onlookers. From behind the wreckage, a man shouted, "By the stars! He slipped right by it!" Another voice, trembling with disbelief, called out, "He moved like he'd done it 100 times!" Their awe rang through the square, but Lyle heard none of it. His focus was locked on the animal that now struggled against the ruins of the stall. The bull's bellow tore through the air like thunder, louder and angrier than before. The crowd's brief hope died as quickly as it was born. The beast was not finished. With a furious heave of its muscles, it wrenched itself free from the wreckage, shaking splinters from its hide. Its dark eyes burned hotter now, no longer just enraged but humiliated. The sight sent men retreating farther into their hiding places, ducking deeper behind wagons, their courage shattered. Lyle stood alone in the open, his breathing ragged, his body trembling from the nearness of death. Sweat ran down the sides of his face, stinging his eyes, but he did not retreat. He adjusted his grip on the bundle still clutched to his chest. Every step the bull took toward him echoed like a drumbeat, counting down the seconds to his end. He had no weapon, no shield, nothing but his wits. From the edge of the square, a sudden voice cut through the chaos. "Boy!" It was harsh, urgent, a bark that made even the crowd turn. Garin, the town butcher, stood half-hidden behind a shattered cart. His broad shoulders were tense, his scarred face set in grim determination. He had never been kind to Lyle before, rarely giving him more than a dismissive grunt when the boy passed his shop. But now his weathered hand gripped a long wooden pole, strong, straight, the kind used to guide oxen. With surprising strength, Garin hurled it across the square. The pole skidded across the dirt, stopping near Lyle's feet. Garin's voice thundered above the din. "Use it, boy!" His eyes, dark and fierce, locked with Lyle's for a heartbeat. In that look was no pity, no doubt, only a command, and beneath it, a flicker of belief. Lyle bent and seized the pole with trembling hands. Its weight grounded him, heavy but steady. He could feel the rough wood against his palms, the splinters biting into his skin. It wasn't much, but it was something that gave him the chance to fight, or at least to survive. His legs shook, but he spread his feet and steadied himself, facing the beast that pawed at the dirt only yards away. The bull charged again, its roar rattling the air. The earth shook with its speed, the distance between them closing in heartbeats. Lyle gritted his teeth, lowered the pole, and at the last moment drove its end into the packed dirt. He vaulted upward, the motion instinctive, as though his body had rehearsed it in secret all his life. For a split second, the world turned weightless. He soared over the bull's broad back, its rough hide rushing beneath him like a storm. Gasps erupted from the crowd, men clutching their heads, mouths hanging open in disbelief. He landed hard on the other side, his knees buckling, the jolt rattling through his thin frame. But he remained standing, his chest heaving with effort. Behind him, the bull skidded to a halt, confused and furious, spinning to face him again. Dust clouded the square, turning the air thick and choking. Yet through the haze, Lyle's eyes sharpened as they fixed on the beast's side. There, along the ribs, the boy saw it. Scars. Long, darkened grooves carved into its flesh, the cruel memory of whip strikes that had cut deeper than skin. old wounds layered with fresh, a history of violence written on its body. His breath caught in his throat. The crowd saw only a monster, but Lyle saw the truth. This animal had been broken, beaten, driven to rage not by madness but by cruelty. A hot wave of anger swept through him, stronger than fear. His thin hands gripped the pole until his knuckles whitened, but not with intent to strike. He felt something shift inside, something heavier than survival. This was not a battle between boy and beast. It was the aftermath of someone else's cruelty. His lips moved before he realized, whispering into the dust-choked air, "It's not madness. It's pain." His voice trembled, yet it carried a conviction that rang deeper than his years. The men hiding in the shadows could not hear him, but the words marked a turning point. Lyle knew, with sudden clarity, that his true fight was not against this creature. The bull was not his enemy. The men who had scarred it, who had turned it into a weapon of rage, those were the ones who deserved his defiance. And as the beast pawed the ground again, preparing for yet another charge, Lyle tightened his grip on the pole and steadied his bare feet in the dirt. His fear was still there, sharp and merciless, but his purpose burned brighter. This moment would not just decide whether he lived or died. It would decide what kind of person he chose to be in the eyes of the world and in the shadow of his father's memory. He realized then that his true fight was not against the bull, but against those who had driven it into such fury. What he did next would change everything. Instead of striking the bull down, Lyle let the pole fall from his hands. The wooden shaft clattered against the dirt, rolling uselessly to the side, and the sound echoed like a betrayal of every man's instinct to fight for survival. His bare feet sank slightly into the dusty ground as he steadied himself, both hands raised in open surrender. The sudden stillness spread across the square like a spell. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if the entire town forgot how to breathe. The boy stood unarmed before a monster that had splintered stalls, overturned carts, and sent grown men fleeing. The bull's nostrils flared, its hot breath steaming in the cool air. Dust clung to its hide, streaked with old scars, and its horns gleamed menacingly. Yet Lyle's eyes did not flinch away. His gaze locked with the beast's, unblinking, steady, filled with something that was not fear but understanding. A murmur broke among the hiding men. "He's mad," one whispered hoarsely. Another shouted desperately, "Move, boy! Finish it before it kills you!" Their voices cracked with panic, but Lyle did not stir. His silence cut sharper than their cries, and the more he refused to act, the more disbelief took root. The square, moments ago alive with chaos, now hung on the edge of an impossible decision. The bull slowed. Its hooves dug shallow furrows into the ground, its chest heaving, breath huffing in bursts that sprayed dirt from its nostrils. Its fury did not vanish, but something about the boy's stillness seemed to confuse it. Its ears twitched, and its head tilted ever so slightly, as if struggling to read an unspoken signal. Lyle reached carefully into the cloth bundle pressed to his chest. His fingers trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. He pulled free a small strip of leather, cracked and worn, its edges frayed from years of use. The leather caught the sunlight faintly, its humble form stark against the dust and wreckage around him. It was his father's old bridle, the only relic he had kept through years of hunger and solitude. To others, it looked like a scrap. To him, it was a lifeline. The boy held it out with both hands. "Easy now," he whispered, though his voice was swallowed by the square's silence. He took a step forward, slow, deliberate, every muscle in his thin frame tense but unyielding. The bull stomped once, the earth jolting beneath the impact, and snorted hard enough to send a cloud of dust swirling. Still, Lyle moved closer. The men in hiding erupted with alarm. "He's lost his senses!" cried one. "He'll be gored before he can touch it!" shouted another. Yet not a soul dared to move to pull him back, for fear the beast's wrath would turn upon them instead. They could only watch as the boy approached death with empty hands and an old strip of leather. When the bull's gaze fell upon the bridle, something shifted. Its head lowered fractionally, nostrils flaring not in rage but in recognition. Its massive body quivered, muscles rippling as if caught between memory and instinct. The crowd's gasps rippled like wind through wheat. Confusion swept across the square. None understood what they were seeing. But Garin, the butcher, narrowed his eyes. His scarred cheek twitched as the realization struck him. In a voice barely above a growl, he muttered to himself, "That beast remembers him. Through the boy." The words stung more deeply than Garin knew. Every man in the square had mocked Lyle for years, dismissing him as a useless orphan, a barefoot shadow with no purpose. They had laughed at his hunger, pitied him only enough to throw scraps, and turned their backs on his loneliness. Yet here he stood, carrying a legacy none of them had guessed. Lyle's father, once a herdsman of rare skill, had trained cattle with a hand so steady and a will so kind that even the fiercest beast had obeyed him. Few remembered his name now, and fewer spoke of him, for his life had ended in the fire that destroyed his home, a blaze that had left Lyle alone in the world. But the bull remembered. Somewhere buried beneath scars and rage, the animal still carried the memory of a firm hand and gentle command. Lyle's breath shook as he drew nearer. He could feel the heat radiating from the beast's hide, hear the grind of its teeth and the tremor in its snorts. His hand quivered as he lifted the bridle toward its head. For a long moment the bull resisted, muscles tensing as if torn between storm and surrender. Its eyes glared with wild fire, then flickered with something softer, almost mournful. "Please," Lyle whispered, his voice barely audible, though his lips moved with desperate clarity. "Remember him. Remember what he taught you." His thin fingers brushed the bull's scarred muzzle, and he pressed the leather gently against its forehead. The bull trembled, its hooves shifting uncertainly, dust spraying as it fought some battle within itself. Then, against all odds, it stilled. Its great chest rose and fell, slower now, steadier. Its head lowered just enough for the bridle to rest against its crown. The silence in the square shattered as astonishment erupted from the crowd. Shouts, gasps, and cries of disbelief surged like a wave. "He's done it!" someone cried. "By the heavens, the beast has bowed!" another shouted. Yet louder than all the noise was the quiet between boy and bull. Their stillness carried a weight no man could match. In that moment, Lyle was no longer the barefoot orphan. They saw him as something more, though none dared name it. But not all were awed. At the edge of the crowd, Rowan, the wealthy cattle merchant who owned the bull, pushed forward. His fine clothes were smeared with dust, his face pale with fury, and his jaw clenched tight. His eyes burned with a venom that had nothing to do with fear of the bull. "That boy just ruined me," he hissed under his breath, his words meant for no one yet heard by those nearest him. His hands shook with rage, fists clenching at his sides. The truth gnawed at him mercilessly. If the townsfolk now believed the beast could be calmed by compassion, then all would see Rowan's cruelty for what it was. They would not call the bull mad anymore. They would call Rowan the cause of its rage. His anger was not at the animal. It was at the orphan who had exposed him. The aftermath of that day reshaped Greyford forever. The square that had once echoed with cries of fear now became the birthplace of stories retold at every hearth and tavern. Men spoke of how the barefoot orphan had stood before death itself and calmed it with nothing but his courage and a strip of worn leather. For the first time in memory, Greyford's people did not look through Lyle. They looked at him. The boy who had scavenged for scraps and slept in abandoned sheds was no longer invisible. Farmers began to seek him out. At dawn, when mist still clung to the fields, men came with hesitant knocks on the old mill where Lyle now stayed. "The heifer won't take to the yoke," one would say, scratching the back of his neck. Another would mutter, "The ox is too wild for my hand." And each time they asked if Lyle might come. It startled him at first. The same men who once crossed the road to avoid him now lowered their voices and tipped their hats when he passed. Their respect was unfamiliar, heavy in a way that felt both welcome and strange. But praise, as Lyle soon learned, was no shield. The true test came from Rowan's vengeance. The merchant had lost more than pride that day. He had lost the very power he had wielded over Greyford's farmers. His wealth came from contracts and his reputation from the strength of his beasts. To admit that compassion, not cruelty, had tamed the bull was to admit he had built his name on lies. And so Rowan whispered, "He bewitched the bull." Rowan sneered to men gathered at the tavern, his voice sharp and bitter. "No natural creature bows like that without trickery. Mark my words, the boy's found some charm to disgrace me." His accusations spread like fire on dry grass. At the market, men muttered as Lyle passed. Some crossed themselves. A few even spat, though less boldly than before. For a time, the whispers grew louder than the truth. Lyle heard them all. Each word cut deeper than he let on, but he walked on with bare feet and quiet resolve. Still, in the quiet of night, lying on the straw mattress in the mill, doubt clawed at him. What if they truly believed Rowan? What if the respect he had gained was only an illusion, as fragile as smoke in the wind? He clenched his father's bridle in his hands, worn leather pressed to his chest, reminding himself of the bull's bowed head, of the trust that no lie could erase. It was Garin who broke the tide of rumor. The butcher had never been known for kindness, yet when Rowan's words gained weight, Garin stood in the tavern and slammed his fist against the table. "I was there," he thundered, his scarred face grim. "That bull wasn't tricked. I saw its eyes. The boy didn't cast spells. He carried a memory that beast still knew. Any man who doubts it can look me in the eye and call me a liar." His voice, rough and steady, cut through the haze of suspicion. Slowly, Others who had witnessed the moment stepped forward too. Their loyalty, once unimaginable, became Lyle's shield. Months passed, and the bull itself silenced the last of the doubters. Kept in Rowan's pens but refusing food or water, the beast grew restless, thrashing against its confines until Lyle came. Only then did it calm, lowering its head to him as though to no other. It ate only when he was near, rested only when his hand brushed its hide. This strange devotion became proof no rumor could erase. Even Rowan could not deny what every farmer saw with his own eyes. The boy had a bond with the beast no cruelty could forge. The irony cut deep. The orphan who had nothing now held the respect Rowan had tried to hoard. But respect brought responsibility. Farmers asked Lyle not only to calm their animals but to teach them. At first he hesitated. "I'm no teacher," he said quietly one morning, standing before 3 men older than his father would have been. Yet they waited, listening as though his words mattered. So he showed them. He placed a hand gently on the neck of a restless ox, spoke softly, and explained, "It isn't about breaking their will. It's about letting them trust yours." Day by day, more men came. They learned that strength came not from whips or ropes, but from patience and understanding. They watched in awe as beasts once feared for their tempers bent their heads beneath Lyle's calm hand. And though Rowan seethed, his hold over Grayford slipped further with each lesson. The merchant did not stop scheming. He hired men to spread darker tales, claiming Lyle sought to lead the farmers against the council, that he meant to set himself above them all. Yet every lie was undone by the sight of the boy himself, barefoot still, his clothes patched and simple, walking the fields with nothing but a strip of leather and steady eyes. His humility disarmed the poison Rowan tried to sow. The final blow came in spring, when the council gathered to renew the livestock contracts that had long been Rowan's claim to wealth. Farmers, once bound by fear of his beasts, stood as one and refused him. "We'll not be ruled by cruelty any longer," one declared. "We'll follow the boy's way." Rowan's protests rang hollow. The council stripped him of his contracts, awarding them to men who had embraced Lyle's teachings. The twist none expected was the bull itself. No longer a terror, it became the very creature that carried Lyle to new beginnings. On the morning after Rowan's downfall, the town gathered in the square once more. Sunlight poured over the rooftops, and there, rising above the crowd, Lyle appeared atop the broad back of the beast that had once been their nightmare. He sat barefoot still, but no longer unnoticed. Children cheered, men tipped their hats, and whispers spread like reverent fire. Everyone knew the truth now, a truth so simple it needed no counsel, no witness, no proof beyond what their eyes could see. As he passed, men leaned to one another and spoke in hushed voices, their words weaving into a single memory that Grayford would carry for generations. Everyone had run from the furious bull, except the orphan with no shoes. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of empathy, unexpected connections, and the profound bonds that can form between those who are often overlooked by society. This narrative aims to highlight that true understanding transcends fear, and that compassion can be found in the most unlikely of places.